Chapter 2. Inadequate Conceptions of the Corruptions of Human Nature. After considering the defective notions of the importance of Christianity in general, which prevail among the higher orders of professed Christians, the particular misconceptions which first come under our notice respect the corruption and weakness of human nature. This is a topic on which it is possible that many into whose hands the present work shall fall may not have bestowed much attention. If the case be so, it may be requisite to entreat them to lend a patient and serious ear. The subject is of the deepest import, nor are we afraid of going too far when we assert that it lies at the very root of all true religion, and eminently the basis and groundwork of Christianity. So far as the writer has had an opportunity of remarking, the generality of professed Christians among the higher classes either altogether overlook or deny, or at least greatly extenuate the corruption and weakness here in question. They acknowledge indeed that there is, and ever has been in the world, a great portion of vice and wickedness, that man have been ever prone to sensuality and selfishness, in disobedience to the more refined and liberal principles of their nature, that in all ages and countries, in public and in private life, innumerable instances have been afforded of oppression, of rapacity, of cruelty, of fraud, of envy, and of malice. They own that it is too often in vain that you inform the understanding and convince the judgment. They admit that you do not thereby reform the hearts of men. Though they know their duty, they will not practice it. No, not even when you have forced them to acknowledge that the path of virtue is also that of real interest and of solid enjoyment. But though these effects of human depravity are everywhere acknowledged and lamented, we must not expect to find them traced to their true origin. Prepare yourself to hear rather of frailty and infirmity, of petty transgressions, of occasional failings, of sudden surprisals, and of other qualifying terms as may serve to keep out of view the true source of the evil, and, without shocking the understanding, may administer consolation to the pride of human nature. The bulk of professed Christians are used to speak of a man as of a being who, naturally pure and inclined to all virtue, is sometimes, almost involuntarily, drawn out of the right course, or is overpowered by the violence of temptation. Vice with them is rather an accidental and temporary, rather than a constitutional and habitual distemper, a noxious plant which, though found to live and even to thrive in the human mind, is not the natural growth and production of the soil. Far different is the humiliating language of Christianity. From it we learn that man is an apostate creature, fallen from his high original, degraded in his nature, and depraved in his faculties, indisposed to good and disposed to evil, prone to vice, it is natural and easy to him, disinclined to virtue, it is difficult and laborious. He is tainted with sin, not slightly and superficially, but radically and to the very core. That such is the scripture account of man, however mortifying the acknowledgment of it may be to our pride, one would think, if this very corruption itself did not warp the judgment, none would be hardy enough to controvert. I know nothing which brings them home so forcibly to my own feelings as the consideration of what still remains to us of our primitive dignity, when contrasted with our present state of moral degradation. Into what depth thou seest, from what height fallen. Milton, Paradise Lost. Examine first with attention the natural powers and faculties of man, invention, reason, judgment, memory, a mind of large discourse, looking before and after, reviewing the past, thence determining for the present and anticipating the future, discerning, collecting, combining, comparing, capable not merely of apprehending but of admiring the beauty of moral excellence, with fear and hope to warn and animate, with joy and sorrow to solace and soften, with love to attach, with sympathy to harmonize, with courage to attempt, with patience to endure, and with the power of conscience, that faithful monitor within the breast, to enforce the conclusions of reason, and direct and regulate the passions of the soul. Truly we must pronounce him majestic, though in ruin. Happy, happy world, would be the exclamation of the inhabitant of some other planet, on being told of a globe like ours, peopled with such creatures as these, and abounding with situations and occasions to call forth the multiplied excellences of their nature. But we have indulged too long in these delightful speculations. A sad reverse presents itself on our survey of the actual state of man, when, from viewing his natural powers, we follow him into practice and see the uses to which he applies them. Take in the whole prospect, view him in every age and climate and nation, in every condition and period of society. Where now do you discover the characters of his exalted nature? How is the gold become dim and the fine gold changed? How is his reason clouded, his affections perverted, his conscience stupefied? How do anger and envy and hatred and revenge spring up in his wretched bosom? How is he a slave to the meanest of his appetites? What fatal propensities does he discover to evil? What inaptitude to good? Dwell a while on the state of the ancient world, not merely on that benighted part of it which all lay buried in brutish ignorance and barbarism, but on the seats of the civilized and polished nations, on the empire of taste and learning and philosophy. Yet in these chosen regions, with whatever lustre the sun of science poured forth its rays, the moral darkness was so thick that it might be felt. Behold their sottish idolatries, their absurd superstitions, their want of natural affection, their brutal excesses, their unfeeling oppression, their savage cruelty. Look not to the illiterate and the vulgar, but to the learned and refined. Form not your ideas on the conduct of the less restrained and more licentious. You will turn away with disgust and shame from the allowed and familiar habits of the decent and moral. St. Paul best states the facts and furnishes the explanation. Because they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, he gave them over to a reprobate mind. True it is, and with joy let us record the concession, Christianity has set the general tone of morals much higher than it ever was found in the pagan world. She has everywhere improved the character of man and multiplied the comforts of society, particularly to the poor and weak, whom from the beginning she professed to take under her special patronage. Like her divine author, who sends his rain on the evil and on the good, she showers down unnumbered blessings on thousands who profit from her bounty, while they forget or deny her power and set at naught her authority. Yet even in this more favoured situation we shall discover too many lamentable proofs of the depravity of man. Nay, this depravity will now become even more apparent and less excusable. For what bars does it not now overleap? Over what motives is it not now victorious? Consider well the superior light and advantages which we enjoy, then appreciate the superior obligations which are imposed on us. Consider in how many cases our evil propensities are now kept from breaking forth by the superior restraints under which vice is laid among us by positive laws and by the amended standards of public opinion. We may be assisted in conjecturing what force is to be assigned to these motives by the dreadful proofs which have lately been exhibited in a neighbouring country, that when their influence is withdrawn, the most atrocious crimes can be perpetrated shamelessly and in the face of day. Consider then the superior excellence of our moral code, the new principles of obedience furnished by the gospel, and, above all, the awful sanction which the doctrines and precepts of Christianity derive from the clear discovery of a future state of retribution, and from the annunciation of that tremendous day when we shall stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Yet in spite of all our knowledge, thus enforced and pressed home by so solemn a notice, how little has been our progress in virtue. It has been by no means such as to prevent the adoption in our days of various maxims of antiquity which, when well considered, too clearly establish the depravity of man. It may not be amiss to adduce a few instances of proof of this assertion. It is now no less acknowledged than heretofore that prosperity hardens the heart, that unlimited power is ever abused instead of being rendered the instrument of diffusing happiness, that habits of vice grow up of themselves, whilst those of virtue are of slow and difficult formation, that they who draw the finest pictures of virtue and seem most enamoured of her charms are often the least under her influence, and by the merest trifles are drawn aside from that line of conduct which they most seriously recommend to others. That all this takes place, though most of the pleasures of vice are to be found with less alloy in the paths of virtue, whilst at the same time these paths afford superior and more exquisite delights, peculiar to themselves, and are free from the diseases and the bitter remorse, at the price of which vicious gratifications are so often purchased. It may suffice to touch very slightly on some other arguments, which it would hardly be right to leave altogether unnoticed. One of these, the justice of which, however, denied by superficial moralists, parents of strict principles can abundantly testify, may be drawn from the perverse and forward dispositions perceivable in children, the correction of which too often baffles the most strenuous efforts of the wise and good. Another may be drawn from the various deceits we are apt to practice on ourselves, to which no one can be a stranger who has ever contemplated the operations of his own mind with serious attention. To the influence of this species of corruption, it has been in great degree owing that Christianity itself has been too often disgraced. The gospel of peace has been turned into an engine of cruelty, and amidst the bitterness of persecution, every trace has disappeared of the mild and beneficent spirit of the religion of Jesus. In what degree must the taint have worked itself into the frame and corrupted the habit, when the most wholesome nutriment can thus be converted into the deadliest poison? Wishing always to argue from such premises as are not only really found, but from such as cannot even be questioned by those to whom this work is addressed, little was said in representing the deplorable state of the heathen world, respecting their defective and unworthy conceptions in what regards a supreme being, who even left not himself without witness, but gave them rain and fruitful seasons, filling their hearts with food and gladness. But surely to any who call themselves Christians, it may be justly urged as an astonishing instance of human depravity that we ourselves, who enjoy the full light of revelation, to whom God has vouchsafed such clear discoveries of what we are concerned to know of his being and attributes, who profess to believe that in him we live and move and have our being, that to him we owe all the comforts we here enjoy and the offer of eternal glory purchased for us by the atoning blood of his own Son. Thanks be to God for his unspeakable gift. That we, thus loaded with mercies, should be continually chargeable with forgetting his authority, and being ungrateful for his benefits, with slighting his gracious proposals, or at best receiving them with cold and unaffected hearts. But to put the question concerning the natural depravity of man to the severest test, take the best of the human species, the watchful, self-denying Christian, and let him decide the controversy, not by inferences drawn from the practices of a thoughtless and dissolute world, but by an appeal to his personal experience. Go with him into his closet, ask him his opinion of the corruption of the heart, and he will tell you that he is deeply sensible of its power, for that he has learned it from much self-observation, and long acquaintance with the workings of his own mind. He will tell you that every day strengthens this conviction, yea, that hourly he sees fresh reason to deplore his want of simplicity in intention, his infirmity of purpose, his low views, his selfish, unworthy desires, his backwardness to set about his duty, his languor and coldness in performing it, that he finds himself obliged continually to confess that he feels within him two opposite principles, and that he cannot do the things that he would. He cries out in the language of the excellent Hooker, "The little fruit which we have in holiness, it is, God knoweth, corrupt and unsound. We put no confidence at all in it. We challenge nothing in the world for it. We dare not call God to reckoning, as if we had in him our debt books. Our continual suit to him is, and must be, to bear with our infirmities and pardon our offences." Such is the moral history, such the condition of man. The figures of the piece may vary, and the colouring may sometimes be of a darker, sometimes of a lighter hue, but the principles of the composition, the grand outlines, are everywhere the same. Wherever we direct our view, we discover the melancholy proofs of our depravity, whether we look to ancient or modern times, to barbarous or civilized nations, to the conduct of the world around us, or the monitor within the breast. Whether we read, or hear, or act, or think, or feel, the same humiliating lesson is forced upon us. Sensual gratification and illicit affections have debased our nobler powers, and indisposed our hearts to the discovery of God, and to the considerations of his perfections, to a constant willing submission to his authority, and obedience to his laws. By a repetition of vicious acts, evil habits have been formed within us, and have riveted the fetters of sin. Left to the consequences of our own folly, the understanding has grown darker, and the heart more obdurate. Reason has at length betrayed her trust, and even conscience herself has aided the delusion, till, instead of deploring our miserable condition, we have too often hugged our chains, and even gloried in our ignominious bondage. Such is the general account of the progress of vice, where it is suffered to attain its full growth in the human heart. The circumstances of individuals, indeed, will be found to differ. To continue a figure so exactly descriptive of the case, the servitude of some is more rigorous than that of others, their bonds more galling, their degradation more complete. Some too have for a while appeared almost to have escaped from their confinement, but none are altogether free. All, without exception, in a greater or less degree, bear about them, more visibly or more concealed, the disgraceful marks of their captivity. Such, on a full and fair investigation, must be confessed to be the state of the facts. And how can this be accounted for on any other supposition than that of some original taint, some radical principle of corruption? All other solutions are unsatisfactory, whilst the potent cause which has been assigned does abundantly, and can alone sufficiently account for the effect. It appears then that the corruption of human nature is proved by the same mode of reasoning as that which hath been deemed conclusive in establishing the existence of the principle of gravitation and ascertaining its laws. That the doctrine rests on that solid basis on which Newton hath raised the superstructure of his sublime philosophy. That it is not mere speculation, an uncertain, though perhaps an ingenious theory, but the sure result of large and actual experiment, deduced from incontestable facts, and still more fully approving its truth by harmonizing with the several parts and accounting for the various phenomena, jarring otherwise and inexplicable, of the great system of the universe. Here, however, revelation interposes and sustains the fallible conjectures of our unassisted reason. The Holy Scriptures speak of us as fallen creatures. In almost every page we shall find something that is calculated to abate the loftiness and silence the pretensions of man. The imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. What is man? That he should be clean, and he which is born of a woman, that he should be righteous. How much more abominable and filthy is man, which drinketh iniquity like water. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Who can say, I have a clean heart, I am pure from my sin? The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Behold, I was shapen in wickedness, and in sin hath my mother conceived me. We were by nature the children of wrath, even as others, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? Passages might be multiplied upon passages which speak the same language, and these again might be illustrated and confirmed by various other considerations drawn from the same secret source, such as those which represent a thorough change, a renovation of our nature, as being necessary to our becoming true Christians, or which are suggested by observing that holy men refer their good dispositions and affections to the immediate agency of the Supreme Being. If such, then, be indeed our sad condition, what is to be done? Is there no hope, nothing left for us but a fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries? Blessed be God, we are not shut up irrevocably in this sad condition. Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Hear one who proclaims his designation, to heal the broken-hearted, to preach liberty to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind. They who have formed a true notion of their lost and helpless state will most gladly listen to the sound, and most justly estimate the value of such a deliverance. And hence appears the importance of not passing over in a cursory manner those important topics of the original and superinduced corruption and weakness of man, a discussion painful and humiliating to the pride of human nature, to which the mind listens with difficulty, nay, with a mixture of anger and disgust, but well suited to our case, and, like the distasteful lessons of adversity, permanently useful in its consequences. It is here, never let it be forgotten, that our foundation must be laid, otherwise our superstructure, whatever we may think of it, will one day prove tottering and insecure. This, therefore, is not a metaphysical speculation, but a practical matter. Slight and superficial conceptions of our state of natural degradation and of our insufficiency to recover from it of ourselves fall in too well with our natural inconsiderateness, and produce that fatal insensibility to the divine warning to flee from the wrath to come, which we cannot but observe to prevail so generally. Having no due sense of the malignity of our disease and of its dreadful issue, we do not set ourselves to work in earnest to obtain the remedy. For let it be remembered that this deliverance is not forced on us, but offered to us. We are furnished indeed with every help, and are always to bear it in mind, that we are unable of ourselves to will or to do rightly, but we are plainly admonished to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, to be watchful, because we are encompassed with dangers, to put on the whole armour of God, because we are beset with enemies. May we be enabled to shake off that lethargy which is so apt to creep upon us. For this end, a deep practical conviction of our natural depravity and weakness will be found of eminent advantage. As it is by this we must at first be roused from our fallacious security, so by this we must be kept wakeful and active unto the end. Let us therefore make it our business to have this doctrine firmly seated in our understandings, and radically worked into our hearts. With a view of the former of these subjects, we should seriously and attentively consider the firm grounds on which it rests. It is plainly made known to us by the light of nature, and irresistibly enforced on us by the dictates of our unassisted understandings. But lest there should be any so obstinately dull as to not discern the force of the evidence suggested to our reason and confirmed by all experience, or rather so heedless as to not notice it, the authoritative stamp of revelation is superadded, as we have seen, to complete the proof, and we must therefore be altogether inexcusable if we still remain unconvinced by such an accumulated mass of argument. There is one difficulty still behind, more formidable than all the rest. The pride of man is loath to be humbled, forced to abandon the plea of innocence, and pressed so closely that he can no longer escape from the conclusion to which we would drive him. Some more bold objector faces about and stands at bay, endeavouring to justify what he cannot deny. Whatever I am, he contends, I am what my Creator made me. I inherit a nature, you yourself confess, depraved and prone to evil. How then can I withstand the temptations to sin by which I am environed? If this plea cannot establish my innocence, it must excuse, or at least extenuate, my guilt. Frail and weak as I am, a being of infinite justice and goodness will never try me by a rule which, however equitable in the case of creatures of a higher nature, is altogether disproportionate to mine. Let not my readers be alarmed. The writer is not going to enter into the discussion of the grand question concerning the origin of moral evil, or to attempt to reconcile its existence and consequent punishment with the acknowledged attributes and perfections of God. These are questions of which, if one may judge from the little success with which the acutest and profoundest reasoners have ever been labouring to solve the difficulties they contain, the full and clear comprehension is above the intellect of man. Yet as the objection above mentioned is sometimes heard from the mouths of professed Christians, it must not be passed by without a few short observations. We are not admitted to such an unqualified extent as altogether to take away the moral responsibility of man, and when not avowed in the daring language in which it has been above stated, it may frequently be observed to exist in an inferior degree, and often, when not distinctly formed into shape, it lurks in secret, diffusing a general cloud of doubt or unbelief, or lowering our standard of right, or whispering fallacious comfort, and producing a ruinous tranquillity. It is of the utmost importance to remark that, though the Holy Scriptures so clearly state the natural corruption and weakness of man, yet they never, in the remotest degree, countenance, but throughout directly oppose, the supposition to which we are often too forward to listen, that our natural corruption and weakness will be admitted as lowering the demands of divine justice, and in some sort palliating our transgressions of the laws of God. It would not be difficult to show that such a notion is at war with the whole scheme of redemption by the atonement of Christ, but perhaps it may be enough, when any such suggestions as those which we are condemning force themselves into the imagination of a Christian, to recommend it to him to silence them by what is their best practical answer, that if our natural condition be depraved and weak, our temptations numerous, and our Almighty Judge infinitely holy, yet that the offers of pardon, grace, and strength to penitent sinners are universal and unlimited. Let it not, however, surprise us if in all this there seems to be involved difficulties which we cannot fully comprehend. How many such everywhere present themselves? Scarcely is there an object around us that does not afford endless matter of doubt and argument. The meanest reptile which crawls on the earth, nay, every herb and flower which we behold, baffles the imbecility of our limited inquiries. All nature calls upon us to be humble. Can it then be surprising if we are at a loss on this question, which respects not the properties of matter or of numbers, but the counsels and ways of him whose understanding is infinite, whose judgments are declared to be unsearchable, and his ways past finding out? In this our ignorance, however, we may calmly repose ourselves on his own declaration, that though clouds and darkness are around him, yet righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne. Let it also be remembered that if in Christianity some things are difficult, that which we are most concerned to know is plain and obvious. To this it is true wisdom to attach ourselves, assenting to what is revealed where above our comprehension, we do not say contrary to our reason, on the credit of what is clearly discerned and satisfactorily established. In truth, we are all perhaps too apt to plunge into depths which it is beyond our power to fathom, and it was to warn us against this very error that the inspired writer, when he has been threatening the people, whom God had selected as the objects of his special favour, with the most dreadful punishments if they should forsake the law of the Lord, and has introduced surrounding nations as asking the meaning of the severe infliction, winds up the whole with this instructive admonition: Secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those which are revealed belong to us and to our children for ever, that we may do all the words of this law. To anyone who is seriously impressed with a sense of the critical state in which we are here placed, a short and uncertain space in which to make our peace with God, and then the last judgment, and an eternity of unspeakable happiness or misery, it is indeed an awful and affecting spectacle to see men thus busying themselves in vain speculations of an arrogant curiosity, and trifling with their dearest, their everlasting interests. But it is a feeble illustration of this exquisite folly to compare it to the conduct of some convicted rebel, who, when brought into the presence of his sovereign, instead of seizing the occasion to sue for mercy, should even treat with neglect and contempt the pardon which should be offered to him, and insolently employ himself in prying into his sovereign's designs and criticising his counsels. But our case, too similar as it is to that of the convicted rebel, differs from it in this grand particular, that at the best his success must be uncertain. Ours, if it be not our own fault, is sure. And while, on the one hand, our guilt is unspeakably greater than that of any rebel against an earthly monarch, so, on the other, we know that our sovereign is long-suffering and easy to be entreated, more ready to grant forgiveness than we to ask for it. Well, then, maybe, adopt the language of the poet. What better can we do than prostrate fall before him reverent, and there confess humbly our faults and pardon beg with tears, watering the ground and with our sighs the air, frequenting, sent from hearts contrite, in sign of sorrow unfeigned and humiliation meek? Milton, Paradise Lost, Book 10.